Why do we trust some people more than others? How does it feel to not be trusted or have our trust betrayed? Why is it sometimes easier to trust a complete stranger in a crisis? Think of Blanche Dubois' famous line, "I have always relied on the kindness of strangers," from Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. There is something in that line that profoundly touches on one of the main essences of trust, vulnerability. Blanche, in that moment of the play, is a fragile thing, and her only possible bet now is for compassion from the world around her, through empathy and kindness. The question is, should she have trusted the world at all? Those of you familiar with the play will know that Blanche's end is not a happy one. Through all her ordeals, she becomes more and more removed from reality, living behind a mask of make-believe that nobody buys. She is alone, desperate, and unprepared to survive in a society that is not built for a woman alone. The moral of the story is that because of her tragic circumstances, she became untrustworthy, unable to show her authentic self, delivering half-truths and completely wrapped up in herself. Within the context of the play, this melodramatic persona is her mode of survival, so we won't judge her. But the fact remains, by being untrustworthy, she gradually became isolated from the world around her to the point of having to believe her own fantasies just to get through the day. Trust is everything. It is how we can live in communities, make connections, start families, overcome conflicts, and thrive. So, how does trust work? In her webinar, Trust as a Foundation for Societal Progress and Wellbeing, Italian philosopher, researcher, and writer Michela Marzano explains how trust is fundamental for society. Without it, there would be essentially no reason to get out of bed in the morning. We trust that our cars will get us where we need to go, the computers will work, and the people will respond in the way we expect them to. It is almost like a social contract to which we are all bound. So, is trust an act of free will or a necessity? This brings forth the question of the paradox of trust. In this sense, we know that each of us must play our part to keep the machine going. So the paradox underlines the contrast between gratuity and cooperation. Is it real trust to offer my reliability to someone if I only do it because I expect reciprocity? This paradox is useful to us now to view the matter from two different sides. Is trust a consequence of reliability, or can trust cause reliability? And to unpack that, let's stop to consider the difference between the concepts of trust and trustworthiness. In her talk, What We Don't Understand About Trust, philosopher Honora O'Neill breaks down the difference between trust and trustworthiness. She argues that over time, the traits that we have considered trustworthy or untrustworthy have remained the same, that the aim should be to have more trust in the trustworthy and less in the untrustworthy. In short, we don't need to trust everybody, but be sensible about where to put our trust and become trustworthy ourselves. The only way to become more trustworthy to others is to be competent, honest, and reliable, and to provide adequate, useful, and simple evidence of the fact. Trusting someone is a response to their trustworthiness, and this is the main quality that we should all work on. So, competent, honest, and reliable. Simple, right? But can we be competent, honest, and reliable at everything, all the time, under every circumstance? This is when it gets tricky. You can trust a chef to create an amazing meal, but you wouldn't trust them to perform open heart surgery. You might forgive a gifted artist for canceling a concert last minute. They're honest and competent, but not reliable. You might use the same taxi service, although the driving is a little bit all over the place, because they always get you there on time. They're reliable and honest, but not very competent at driving. Most of us have that friend who you can confide in absolutely, but you would never ask them to pick you up at the airport because they will likely forget. Does that make them wholly untrustworthy? So when we ask ourselves, can I trust that person? The real question is, can I trust them to do what exactly? We are less likely, however, to forgive someone who is reliable and competent at their job, but we find them lying or stealing. Honesty trumps everything else. This is the key factor that connects trust with vulnerability and being ourselves. There is simply no trust without transparency. But in this day and age, we seem to be so convinced of each other's dishonesty that we have placed the human bonding process of trust outside of ourselves. In this vigilance, we end up wasting time, money, energy, and our sense of community. You could say that distrusting each other has become a business. Intricate security systems, password technology, bodyguards, firearms, and even wars. It all relies on us consistently not trusting each other. We have created a society that has become used to being constantly on edge, fearsome, anxious, and stressed. Now, I'm not saying we should be careless and blindly throw ourselves into the abyss like 16-year-old me in that theater trust exercise, but it makes me wonder about what I like to call the paradox of mistrust. We invest so much in external measures to guarantee our safety that we lose touch with our internal trust compass. A muscle that we don't work out gets atrophied. While trying to feel safe in isolation, we tend to become more scared. Placing everyone's trustworthiness outside of themselves is terrifyingly disempowering for everyone. If you can't trust anyone, you can't trust yourself. This brings us back to Miss Blanche Dubois. Honesty was ultimately her downfall, but her dishonesty was coming from a place of survival, denial, and infinite sadness, which has to do with her own experiences, self-esteem, self-worth, and having her vulnerability repeatedly abused. The more trust is betrayed, the more untrustworthy we all become. Trust is something that is given to us when we provide evidence that we are trustworthy. This evidence should be adequate, useful, and simple. If a shop assistant tells me a piece of clothing I'm trying on does not suit me, I'm more likely to trust her. She's choosing to tell me the truth, even though she might lose out on me buying the item. If instead she suggests I try on a more expensive item, then I might become suspicious. In a way, we trust whoever makes themselves vulnerable to us. When they act on our behalf, even though there is nothing in it for them, the reward for the bravery of vulnerability is trust, which is how most long-lasting relationships are built. Professor Marzano says, "We are vulnerable as we let the others decide if they are up to our standards. Trust makes us stronger by leaving us vulnerable." But what happens when there is no proof? How is it that a lot of the time we trust people even though we have no evidence of their trustworthiness? Here comes a paradox again. Sometimes trust is a bet. We have no evidence of reliability, but we choose to trust someone regardless. In emergency situations, we too, like Blanche, rely on the kindness of strangers. When we trust someone for free, we show our vulnerability. And more often than not, this free trust creates reliability in the other person. This can be especially true in children. Believing in them to do the right thing is empowering and can trigger a self-fulfilling prophecy. Having someone trust us is a gift to our confidence, self-esteem, and societal well-being. If we are trusted, we belong. When we know what being trusted feels like, we begin to trust ourselves. Our trustworthiness is our main credential to be able to participate in society. In order to be trusted and trust in others, we first need to trust ourselves. For this to happen, we need to have an awareness of our own value. What is our word worth? Professor Marzano says, the main characteristic of a person is their dignity, their intrinsic or inherent value. So, we need to understand and be ourselves in order to appreciate our own value. The more authentic we are as a person, the more we advance on the path of accepting ourselves, the more trustworthy we become. In order to maintain trusting relationships, we must have a consistent reputation. Part of our instinctive human behavior is to maintain trust because we fear the consequences if trust is betrayed. In a group setting, if there are no consequences for the person that breaks the trust, what follows is the crumbling of the trustworthiness in the whole community. Transparency, honesty, and empathy are fundamental for a sturdy trust system. So, can we actually rebuild trust? The good news is that human beings learn and grow. And by adjusting the consequences of trust breaking from an empathetic, proportional perspective, the trust breaker has a chance to be redeemed and learn from the experience. Who knows what a little more kindness from the environment would have meant for Blanche Dubois? John F. Helliwell and Shun Wang published a paper in 2011 that described the results of a trust research conducted in Canada. The experiment consisted in leaving a number of wallets around the city and comparing the number of wallets returned against the expectations of citizens. Interestingly, people in general proved to be more trustworthy than they were expected to be. The study links the results to well-being, placing trust as a fundamental factor in building connections and collaborative action. According to the wallet experiment, those who feel themselves to be living in a trustworthy environment have much higher levels of subjective well-being. In their words, trust is built on a base of shared positive experience and is nurtured by continued connections. On the other hand, unrealistic pessimism about the trustworthiness of others leads to higher levels of stress and anxiety and to an overall lower level of subjective well-being. In short, we are better than we think we are. The question is, why do we not feel this way? Is it a consequence of consuming overwhelming amounts of bad news, fear of the unknown, bad experiences of broken trust? The reality is that this perceived trustworthiness or untrustworthiness is what ultimately impacts our well-being. Helliwell and Yang say, this suggests that substantial and essentially costless increases in subjective well-being could be obtained if people were better informed and hence more optimistic about the trustworthiness of others. And so, we are back in the paradox of trust. Trust is both the consequence and the cost of reliability. I know this all sounds easier said than done, and that the main reason why we might not trust our environment is that we are trying to protect ourselves and the ones we love. But have you ever come across a positive news article about a community coming together to help a child in need or someone anonymously donating school resources? I bet you have said to yourself, this makes me recover my faith in humanity. I know I have. We crave good news, good experiences, and good connections to recover our sense of who we are and feel safe to be ourselves authentically. But if we are to be ourselves, we must allow others to be themselves and cooperate and get to know others who are different from us. In his book, Humankind, Dutch historian Rutger Bregman argues that empathy can be a double-edged sword. We tend to identify with those who are most like us. This is also true for trust. We trust those who seem familiar, that which we know. And if on one hand this makes absolute sense because the known has given us evidence of their reliability, when there's nothing else to inform us, likeness can give us a blinding bias. As members of society, we know this all too well. Why else do we try so hard to blend in? From the classroom to fashion to workplaces, we sense the norms and adhere to the uniform, gradually hiding our true selves because we can't trust that we will be accepted as we are. We become afraid, unassertive, and uncertain. External labels like religions and political parties become easy indicators of trustworthiness, but they oversimplify the unique qualities of each person. Accepting diversity and breaking systems that reinforce sameness is the only way to build genuinely safe spaces. If children are discouraged from finding themselves, they cannot possibly understand their own value. If they don't know their value, they cannot trust themselves. They can't trust others, and it's likely that they will be less trustworthy in the long run. In our next lessons, we will dive deeper into the dynamics of trust within education and how theater tools can help us embody these concepts in a transformative way. In the meantime, next time you need to break the ice in a meeting, why don't you ask everyone to tell a funny and embarrassing story about their lives? Sharing vulnerability in a light-hearted way will immediately create a more trusting, engaged, and productive environment. Until next time.